What's going on, everyone, and welcome into Plizone's podcast, filled to the brim with glitchy analysis and freezing cold takes, so cold that they're boiling hot. In this episode, we are going to be continuing our college football playoff series, and we're going to be talking about the Texas Longhorns today. Let's go ahead and get into the stars on offense. Quarterback Quinn Ewers. If you've watched college football in the last couple of years, you know who this guy is. Top 10 quarterback in all of college football, projected first-round pick. I think he's a brilliant passer of the football, especially in the 2-minute and game-winning drive situations. Now, he slipped up in the college football playoffs last year, but I don't expect him to do that again this year. This is going to be a college football playoff contender for me and an SEC championship contender. So, Quinn Ewers is definitely got to watch for something like the Heisman, Maxwell Award, you name it, he's in that conversation. At wide receiver now, Isaiah Bond, a transfer who has a lot to work with because there's a lot of talent that has left this Texas team in the draft and the transfer portal. Isaiah Bond's got some big shoes to fill, but I think that he can do that pretty easily, in my opinion. He's a minimum 1,000-yard receiver this year. He's going to be the number one target for this offense, so be sure to look out for him. Him and Quinn Ewers are going to get their connection established early, and it's going to play a big factor in Texas's long-term winning over the course of the season. Now, on the defensive side of the ball, we're talking about two pass rushers. First, Ethan Burke. If there's going to be a second guy to get to the quarterback, it's going to be Ethan Burke. Most likely going to be the weak side rusher. Pretty much left side, I think, rushing the passer. He's a good edge shedder. Not too much in the run game, but when it comes to getting their ears pinned back and going for the quarterback, Ethan Burke is the guy. Now, speaking of the guy, I said Ethan Burke is the second guy to get to the quarterback. The first guy, Trey Moore, a transfer from UTSA. Absolute phenom of a prospect, in my opinion. Underrated for sure. He is going to be torturing quarterbacks this year. So be sure to look out for Trey Moore and Ethan Burke. These guys are going to be absolutely gunning for the opposing team's quarterback. Now let's talk about a storyline that I think is really important for this Texas offense going in this year. They're returning 4 or 5 starters to their offensive line. And when you have a perennial college football playoff contender like Texas, Alabama, Georgia, Michigan, you name it, you tend to lose a couple of linemen every single year to the draft just because you're bringing in this immense talent. But they were able to return 4 or 5. I think that's really important because Quinn Ewers is going to be reestablishing connections with a bunch of different wide receivers, and he's going to need time to get his timing down, his throws down, and making sure that he can call audibles in a way that the offensive line understands. And when you have past experience with a quarterback, it makes it a lot easier to hear those audibles, get your blocking assignments done the right way. I think that's really important for Texas. Now let's talk about some of the key losses and additions to this team. The losses side of things, it's pretty heavy. Byron Murphy and Trevonde Sweat, the defensive tackles for this team, it is so unbelievably underrated what they were able to do for this Texas team last year. A big part of the reason why they beat Alabama, which was, in my opinion, a pretty shocking win, just because they were able to go into Bryant-Denny and win by, I think, over 2 touchdowns. Extremely impressive stuff, but those are 2 guys who Texas is going to miss, and they didn't really do a good job of replacing this year. So that's 2 big holes in the front 7 for Texas's defense. Now, back on the offense, the skill position group takes a massive hit. Xavier Worthy goes in the draft, Adonai Mitchell goes in the draft, and Jonathan Brooks, the running back, goes in the draft. 2 number 1 and number 2 targets for the wide receiver group, and then your starting running back all gets drafted. That is a big punch in the gut when it comes to Quinn Ewers' continued success. It's always a good thing to have continuity on a team. And so when you have all of this talent leaving at once, it leaves a lot to be desired for the next season. Now let's go ahead and talk about the additions. Trey Moore, I've already discussed this guy. He's going to be a star on this team. 14 sacks for UTSA last season. I'm expecting probably 10 just because, UTSA doesn't play in the SEC and the SEC is a little harder. But nonetheless, Trey Moore is going to be one of the best pieces of this Texas team. Isaiah Bond, I've also discussed him, wide receiver transfer from Alabama. Big shoes to fill with all these losses in the wide receiver group, but if there was anybody to do it that was in the transfer portal, Isaiah Bond is one of the top 3 guys, most definitely. The last thing I want to talk about is Andrew Mukuba, I think is his name, a safety transfer from Clemson. I haven't watched a ton of film on this guy, but I've heard really good things, especially from practice. He is going to be a crucial part of this Texas secondary, and he strengthens up this defensive back room when last year it wasn't that great. So I think that that's a strong transfer addition for this Texas team. Now, a couple more storylines before I get into the record prediction. There are major defensive line and wide receiver questions for this team. Now, losing all of that talent in one single season can be dangerous, but I do want to point out that I think, quote unquote, Texas is back, especially when it comes to recruiting. And so they're going to have talent at these positions, but most importantly, it's all about experience and how quickly can these new additions and talents add to this team in a meaningful way. I think that they can do it, but that is the big question marks for this team, wide receiver and defensive line. And the last point I want to make is this is Steve Sarkisian's most important year. Texas makes it back to the college football. Well, they didn't make it back to the national championship, but the college football playoff, they've never made. They did it last season. Now coming into the SEC, it's time to make a statement. I think Texas, it's so important to get good recruits over and over and over again. And with the state of Texas, there's lots of them. But when you don't make the college football playoff and you're like the staple program of the state, I don't know. It's just harder to recruit when you're not doing well, obviously. So I think Steve Sarkisian, to continue his success next year and the next, he's got to win big this year. I think it's college football playoff or bust for Texas this year. Now, that's not really a freezing cold take, so cold that it's boiling hot per se, but every single game is important. I mean, Texas, every single season, drops a game that they're not supposed to. Last year, they lost to Oklahoma. They shouldn't have lost because they were up big late in the game, and Oklahoma comes back in a miracle. But regardless, you can't drop stupid games. You got to play every game like it's meant to be because you're in the SEC and every game matters. Now, without further ado, let's get into our beloved record prediction. So, to start, let me grab my schedule here. We've got Colorado State. Not lots to talk about here. A lower FBS team coming in on the road to Texas. That's a win. At Michigan, to me, this is the hinge game for this Texas season. I'm not certain that they're going to win. It's at Michigan. However, there is something that I do want to talk about, and that's Michigan and all of these allegations of cheating and recruiting violations and film stealing and sign stealing and blah, 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 whatever the accusations are. They're serious and they're causing a lot of noise. And with a new head coach in the driver's seat for this Michigan team, I'm not so certain they're going to be ready to play Texas week 2. This Texas team has done everything the right way this offseason. Michigan, not at all. So as of right now, I'm calling that Texas can pull off the win versus Michigan. But if we see things change over the next month or so before this game and Michigan show signs of, competence and stability, two things that they don't have right now, I might lean back towards Michigan. I initially had this as a loss for Texas, but things change, obviously, and I think that they can pull out the win. Now they go back versus UTSA. Trey Moore gets his game back against his old team. I think he's going to torture them. That's a win. Versus Louisiana Monroe, more of the same here. Your non-conference schedule, that's another win. I think Texas also appreciates going from 9 conference games to 8 conference games because you get another freebie. All that being said, we got Mississippi State at home. That's a win. Then you've got the Red River rivalry. That's a neutral site game, but Oklahoma, I don't think, is ready to compete with a team the caliber of Texas. I will give them the win. However, they did win last year, so don't be shocked if they win it again. I'm going to give the edge to Texas right now. The biggest game of the year, though, Georgia, coming into Austin, Texas. I am going to give Quinn Ewers the edge here. I think he's a little bit better than Carson Beck. I don't know if this Georgia team is the team to do it. They've got the toughest schedule of the Kirby Smart era, and I've marked this down as a loss for Georgia. We're going to give it to Texas at Vanderbilt. Very easy SEC game. Worst team in the conference. That's a win. Versus Florida at home. Versus Florida at home, I will once again call this a pretty easy game, especially late in the season. There's going to be noise about Billy Napier potentially losing his job. So I'm going to give that edge to Texas there. And then at Arkansas, more of the same here. Sam Pittman, noise around that locker room. Going to give the edge to Texas here, of course. I don't think that's going to be a close game. Kentucky at home, once again, more of the same. This Kentucky team pretty much underperforms when they're supposed to do well and overperform when they're not supposed to do well. And I think right here they might overperform, but I got to give the home field advantage to Texas. I think it's going to be a pretty easy game. Last game of the year, though. Third toughest game at Texas A&M. I think Quinn Ewers is going to have a really hard time against this A&M defense, but I don't know if they're going to do worse than A&M's offense. That's why I give the edge here to Texas. Ladies and gentlemen, that's right now is a 12-0 season. Like I said, I initially had them at 11-1, but because of Michigan's noise, I'm calling it a 12-0 year. I think they're going to face off against Alabama in the SEC championship game, and this is going to put Texas in the conversation to be potentially one of the next dynasties. We've talked about Georgia, and now Texas is in that conversation too. That's going to do it for this episode. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Next time, we're going to be talking about Vanderbilt, so be sure to tune into that one, and we'll see you next time.